Well, good afternoon to all of you, and thank you to the organizers for organizing this wonderful meeting. It's wonderful to have, and it's not so usual today to have one session, not parallel session during our meeting. So I think this will be, we're going to have wonderful 4 days and sharing our ideas and our projects and attending to all the presentations. I'm SUSANA SARDO, and we have this first paper in the afternoon. And the first paper is not a paper, the first panel. The first panel is represented by researchers from one research project that we have at the University of Aveiro, at the Institute of Ethnomusicology Research Center of Music and Dance at our university. The project is called Liber Sound, and Liber Sound means innovative archival practices towards sound memory liberation, recording music, transcontinental experience, connected communities. The PI of this project is my PEDRO ARAGÃO, and I'm the co-PI. And Liber Sound, the goals of Liber Sound aims to liberate the musical heritage trapped in obsolete media, such as 78 RPM discs, but also magnetic tapes. The project applies innovative archival processes to facilitate the reactivation of memory. So we have an abstract of the project here. And is centered on specific sound archives that provide insights into transits between sound practices and musicians in Portuguese-speaking communities. Of course, we are using this corridor between Goa, Mozambique, Portugal, and Brazil. Shared sound spaces that give rise to autonomous music expressions and processes of resistance to colonial domination between Portugal and its former colonies. In a certain way, it also addresses some of the issues that were presented by Professor Catherine. So we have the full team. We work a lot with teams. Of course, we carried out our individual research, but mostly in Portugal, we have funds to organize, make research with research teams. So we have in Liber Sound 22 researchers from Brazil, Mozambique, Portugal, and India, Goa. And the duration of the project is between February 2021 and January 2024. We get 250,000 euros for this project. And also we have 2 PhD students, CRISTIANO TSOPE and Bianca Maria Binazzi, who is not here with us, and 1 master student, NALINI. So Cristiano is with us. He has a scholarship from this research project, and he is from Mozambique. And NALINI SOUSA has a master scholarship for this research project, and she is from Goa. The international advisor of this project is our colleague Miguel Garcia from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. So we have, an international research project, and it's very good to work with different perspectives addressing the 78 RPM heritage. So this panel is called Colonial and Post-Colonial Dynamics in Music Industry, the case of early commercial recordings production in Portugal, Brazil, Mozambique, and Goa. The first presentation will be made by PEDRO ARAGÃO. PEDRO ARAGÃO is a researcher and a professor now settled in our university, but he is originally from Brazil, from the University of Rio de Janeiro, where he is also a professor, but now he is with us for 5 years at my university, and for 4 years. And I'm the next one. He's going to speak about Casa Edison and the Brazilian early commercial recordings. I'll speak after Pedro with José Moças. I think he is going to be with us online. José Moças is a collector from Portugal, And he gave to our university a collection of 6,500 shellac discs. So this was the beginning of a big adventure for all of us, and that's why we are here. We start everything with this donation. Then we have the NALINI, ELVINO de Souza, speaking about the lost discs, reconstructing the Goa All India Radio Archives through listening memories, a methodology that she applied in the last months in Goa for preparing for this presentation. And finally, we have CRISTIANO TSOPE speaking about the early gramophone records from Mozambique, the case of Radio Mozambique Sound Archive, when we have one of the biggest collection of 78 RPMs amongst all this the focus of Universal. So please, it's now I'm going to give the floor to Pedro.
So thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the organizing committee. I'm very happy to be here and to have this opportunity to talk a little bit about early Brazilian recording, commercial recordings. So this panel is focused on colonial and decolonial issues concerning 78 RPM shellac disc collections in Portuguese-speaking countries and territories. Academic research on early commercial recordings is historically recent in countries like Brazil, and it's mainly focused on historical aspects, in addition to concerns with digitization and preservation issues. In this paper, I will try to present some historical aspects related to the Brazilian phonographic industry. Brazil was the first country in Latin America to develop a solid phonographic activity at the beginning of the 20th century. Casa Edison, the first recording label in the country, was created in 1901, and from 1902 to 1964, around 4,000 phonograms were recorded in Brazil. However, more than reviewing these historical aspects, I intend to discuss how can we relate concepts such as colonialism and decoloniality with these shellac disc collections. In which ways a collection of 78 RPM shellac discs can be studied from a decolonial perspective? What do the sounds stored in those collections have to tell us about histories of racial and political oppression? Far from trying to establish grand theorizations on this theme, I'd like to start with a short story that can illustrate first folklore professor, Luis Heitor Corrêa de Azevedo. At the end of each folklore class, I remember noticing the presence of a short Italian-looking old man who waited for the end of each class to speak to our professor. The old man insisted on having access to a collection of discs that were stored in this room. My teacher argued that the collections in that room were not available for public consultation, but the old man stubbornly insisted on gaining access to the discs. He claimed to be a collector and a researcher who was writing a history of 78 RPM records in Brazil. Despite his insistence, my professor continued to deny access, stating that those collections were not available for consultation. At that time, I did not know that private collectors and the academic world did not always cultivate the best relations. In any case, I followed those discussions with curiosity for several weeks until finally my professor reached an agreement with that collector. To summarize, the collector name was Umberto Franceschi. Here. Umberto Franceschi. So, the book A Casa Edison e Seu Tempo. On the other hand, I finally understood that one of those dusty cabinets in our folklore room held hundreds of 78 RPM discs recorded in Rio de Janeiro in the early 20th century. The agreement between my teacher and the collector was that the discs would be taken to the collector's home to be cleaned and digitized. At the end of the process, the discs would return to the university and the collector would give us a digital copy, and in return, he would also keep a digital copy for his personal use. Since I was interested in that story, I was eventually assigned as a trainee who would follow this process. In the following months, I was able to listen to the sounds recorded in the city of Rio de Janeiro at the beginning of the 20th century at the collector's home, and that was a truly libertarian decolonial process for me. As a Brazilian popular musician, I had serious problems at the university. At that time, the music faculty in Brazil was entirely devoted to teaching European classical music. My training as a musician, on the other hand, was totally based on urban popular music of Afro-Brazilian nature, in musical genres such as samba and choro. In other words, the music I had cultivated and learned on the streets of Rio de Janeiro was forbidden at my university. So listening to that early commercial recordings gave me the opportunity to understand the historical link between the practice of popular music that I learned on the streets of Rio de Janeiro with the musical legacy of the old Afro-Brazilian popular musicians recorded at the beginning of the 20th century. So I will develop this idea in the final part of this presentation, but before that, I will give you a brief historical review of the beginning of the phonographic industry in Brazil, highlighting its role in the recording of Afro-Brazilian musical practices. So, the history of phonographic industry is normally centered on European and Anglo-Saxon perspectives, since global production was economically dominated by the countries which constituted the mainstream of global capitalism. As pointed out by many authors, such as Pekka Grunow and Christian Malm, the establishment of the major record companies in Europe and in the United States led to an international division of phonographic production. On one side, the industrialized countries had phonographic companies that developed and controlled sound reproduction technology through patents and owned industrial plants for large-scale production of records. On the other hand, there were commercial agents who went out into the colonial areas in search of locations where they could establish record labels. Once the masters were recorded, the material was sent to factories in industrialized countries for large-scale production. In Brazil, phonographic recordings began with a local agent named Frederico Figner. This guy, born in the city of Milevsko, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1866. At the end of the 19th century, Figner immigrated to the United States and there began a career as a phonograph salesman in Latin America. He arrived in Brazil in 1891, and in 1900, he settled permanently in Rio de Janeiro, where he opened Casa Edison, a store in which he sold various kinds of technological novelties, such as kinetoscopes, telephones, typewriters, and talking machines. In July 1901, Fred Figner began negotiations with Frederick Prescott, representative of Sonophone International, based in Berlin, in order to establish an agreement to make the first Brazilian recordings with the technology invented by Emil Berliner. The agreement with Sonophone stipulated that Frederick Figner should pay for the entire phonogram production process, which included the travel costs of the recording technician from Berlin to Rio de Janeiro, the provision of the recording room, the technical and human material. Then, Figner should send the recorded master to the European factory, besides being obliged to buy most of this production for resale in Rio de Janeiro. Once this partnership was established, the first phonographic recordings were made in January 1902. 175 records in 7-inch formats and 75 records in 10-inch format, covering a repertoire essentially linked to urban popular music, with canzonetas and lundus interpreted by the singer Eduardo das Neves, who was a very famous singer in the city in this period, and polkas, machiches, and Scottish, interpreted by the Banda do Corpo de Bombeiros, conducted by Anacleto de Medeiros, one of the first Black conductors in Brazil. In 1911, Figner began negotiations to build a record factory in the city. With the technical support of the Swedish group Lindström, he imported machinery, and in 1913, the Fábrica de Discos Odeon was inaugurated. The first record factory in Latin America had the most advanced technology at the time for the industrial reproduction of phonograms, all imported from Europe, and 150 workers. Its average production capacity reached 125,000 discs per month, according to Franceschi. In 1927, the arrival of electric recording technology and other international groups, such as Victor, Brunswick, and Columbia, gave an even greater boost to record sales in Brazil. As mentioned before, from 1902 to 1964, around 4,000 phonograms were recorded in Brazil, transforming the country into one of the main record-producing poles in Latin America. In 1964, shellac discs were replaced by long plate technology in Brazil, and progressively, the 78 RPM disc became an obsolete media. It's important to stress that Brazil never had public politics concerning the preservation of sound heritage. Thus, the process of safeguarding Brazilian S78 RPM discs heritage was mainly conducted by private collectors, such as Humberto Franceschi and Miguel Ângelo Nireis, who published in 1984 the first Brazilian catalog devoted to these discs, Discografia Brasileira, in 5 volumes. In 2019, Instituto Moreira Salles, a private cultural institution in Brazil, created the Discografia Brasileira em 78 Rotações website, the largest online collection in Brazil, where you can listen to more than 45,000 Brazilian phonograms recorded between 1902 and 1964. I think I can show you here briefly this website. Yeah. It is online, and if you go there, you can search for the name of the music, the author, interpreter, and
put here. No?
Yeah, put here. For instance. So, for instance, you have here a few examples of these Anacleto Medeiros.
25 items.
Yeah, and you can listen, if you click, you can listen to the entire recording. So after this brief historical review of the phonographic industry in Brazil, I return to some of the initial questions related to decoloniality and sound archives. How can a collection be studied from a decolonial perspective? According to Gather and Caswell, I quote, the decolonial archive refers to those innumerable and intertwined material and immaterial traces left by anti-colonial figures and decolonial movements in the 20th century around the globe, end of quotation. As previously mentioned in the first part of this paper, listening to these recordings, 78 RPM recordings, allowed me to get in touch with the history of musicians, mostly Black musicians, who were part of Brazilian popular music, particularly the choro and samba tradition in Rio de Janeiro. A significant part of the memory of these musicians has completely disappeared. We barely know their names and biographical data. In many cases, the 78 RPM discs are often the only remaining traces of their trajectories. I will give two short examples. The first one is that of Pedro Galdino, a Black flautist and textile factory worker in Rio de Janeiro, who recorded a series of discs for the Parlophone label in 1911 with his ensemble that was called Africanos de Vila Isabel. I have a picture here. Vila Isabel is a neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro, and they call themselves the Africans from Vila Isabel. For about 20 years, I have been trying to find biographical data about these musicians in Brazilian archives. With the exception of this photo, published in Rio in a Rio de Janeiro newspaper in the 1910s, no other information about them has survived. In the meantime, we can hear to the sound of this music of this musical ensemble, thanks to the phonograph records that they have reminded. We are going to listen now a small example of one recording that is called Flauzina. It's in the label. It's classified as a polka, but we are going to listen.
Flauzina, choro pelo pessoal do bloco para a Casa Edison, Rio de Janeiro.
Well, the recording allows us to understand how the polka, European musical style from Eastern Europe, was appropriated and resignified by Black musicians in Brazil. I could say a lot about it, but we don't have time now. The second example is that of Geraldo Magalhães, a Black Brazilian singer born in 1878. In the early 20th century, he began his artistic career as a singer and actor, I have a photo here, in popular theaters in Rio de Janeiro. And in 1907, he began his international career performing in Lisbon and Paris. He left a total of 82 phonograms recorded in Rio de Janeiro and Lisbon, mostly with Afro-Brazilian genres such as machiches, sambas, and lundus. His pioneering work as a promoter of Afro-Brazilian musical genres in Europe has been the object of few academic studies, and his trajectory remains understudied. So, conclusions. Despite the crucial importance of Afro-musical heritage for contemporary Brazilian society, field recordings dedicated to this Afro-Brazilian musical practice only took place in the early 30s, albeit in a very sporadic and anomalous ways. The folkloric expeditions conducted by Brazilian musicologist Maria Andrade in 1935 and Luiz Heitor Correia de Azevedo in the 40s resulted in a few hundred recordings, but they are one of the few examples of field recordings made in Brazil in the first half of the 20th century. By contrast, as previously mentioned, Brazil has developed a solid phonographic industry since the beginning of the 20th century, This large phonographic production was mainly focused on these popular urban musical styles with a strong presence of Afro-Brazilian musical practice. The contrast between the relatively small number of field recordings on the one hand, and the significant number of commercial recordings made by Black artists and groups on the other, leads us to a series of questions that I've been questioning myself in this last months, years. Would it be valid to consider early commercial recordings as an expression of an ethnic and cultural group? What are the borders between commercial and field recordings? Can ethnomusicological analysis be applied to early commercial recordings? What do these recordings have to teach us about transatlantic music circulation? And how the trajectory and voices of Brazilian musicians can be reconstructed through the study of sound archives? These are questions that can guide new strategies for studying the archive from a decolonial perspective, in my opinion. In other words, sound archives can be used not only as tools for the comprehension of racial segregation in colonial practice during the first half of the 20th century. They can also be used to recover the voices of those who were silenced and repressed in third world countries that inherited the traditions of 19th century imperial colonialism. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pedro. I don't know, we can let all the questions for the end of the panel because all of our presentations are a little bit connected, okay? So I'm gonna shift for the next one. Oh, it's my one, my presentation with José Moças. And it's called Bem da Nação, the double label of the first Portuguese commercial recordings in colonial and dictatorship times. I'm SUSANA SARDO. I'm an ethnomusicologist, and we can talk about this later. And I'm working about Goa since a long time ago. I work especially on post-colonial theory, but also in archives. So I'm with Gerda. We were co-chair of the study group of ICTM for now called Archives and Sources for Music and Song Studies. And that's it. So in this presentation, I will be analyzing, well, for me, it's the first approach to analyze the collection of Portuguese labels of 78 RPM records. So we have many ways of approaching this collection. So this is one of them. Well, a Bem da Nação, the phrase a Bem da Nação, meaning for the good of the nation, was widely used during the Portuguese dictatorship regime from 1933 to 1974, appearing in official and institutional documents as a farewell or closing remark. You can see it here. It was not merely a polite formula, but a slogan that conveyed a sense of collective purpose and loyalty to the regime and its leader, António Salazar. The phrase also implied that all laws, actions, and policies were designed and carried out for the betterment of the nation. However, it was often used to justify authoritarian measures and suppress dissenting voices, and its repeated use contributed to the regime's propaganda and the manipulation of public opinion. The concept of nation is ambiguous and depends on the context and place of enunciation. In the case of Portugal, during the dictatorial and colonial regime, the notion of nation included a mission, the defense of a territory that was a social, cultural, and economic extension of the nation. This is a map. You can see here a map that was often used by the regime to show that Portugal was not a small country, So what they used to do was to put the map of the colonies in Europe and show that we were the biggest country of Europe, that Russia is there. It was like that. So it was very much used by the dictatorial regime and colonial one to show how big we were. So in the name of the nation, of course. I'm sorry. In the case of Portugal, during the dictatorial and colonial regime, the notion of nation included a mission, the defense of a territory that was social, cultural, and economic extension of the nation state, including the necessary inclusion of its minorities. In this case, I refer to the illiterate and rural majorities, in fact, of the metropolis, but also those, also majorities, in the different colonies who defined the indigenous as individuals of Black race or their descendants, who, having been born, I'm quoting, or habitually living in them, do not yet possess the education and individual and social habits presumed for the full application of the public and private rights of Portuguese citizens. This is a law of 1954, okay? So the maintenance of the social fragmentation was essential for the maintenance of a social elite in the metropolis and in the colonies, of course, as a form of internal domination and external display of a certain way of being Portuguese. The construction of this elite frequently involved the creation and adoption of transversal models of behavior and social codes that impose a certain sense of Portuguese identity. The elites mimicked other European elites and constituted themselves as models for internal mimicry and for the extension of the nation in its imperial version. We have here some pictures. So this is a picture taken in Portugal of a family of a very well-known actress. This is a picture taken in Mozambique. They are more or less of the same age. Another one in Mozambique. This one is in Goa. So we see that, and this is a picture taken in Mozambique. This is the family of the Regulo. He was an indigenous, but in a certain way, he was also mimetizing or mimicrizing some of the European models. The post-colonial theory demonstrates that colonial regimes use subliminal processes of domination through the construction of cultural, religious, and individual mimicries, creating the illusion of a national extended beyond the borders of the metropolis. I'm using the concept of mimicry as used by Homi Bhabha in post-colonial theory. Inspired in the mimetic man concept created by V.S. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of V.S. Naipaul, I'm sorry. In the case of Portugal and its colonies, music has been an instrument of domination since early on, through the introduction of Western music in places as far away as Brazil in South America, the African countries of Mozambique, Angola, Cape Verde, São Tomé, and Guinea, and in Asia, such as the territories of Goa, Damau, Diu, Malacca, Macau, or Timor, among many others. Music was initially used as an instrument of religious colonization by serving as a mediator for learning the Catholic doctrine and also as a substitute for local repertoire that was prohibited by the colonizer. Gradually, the introduction of Western music gave rise to mimetic genres with a European flavor, such as the well-known Cape Verdean music, so well represented by Morna, but also in Goa by Mandó. We have here some examples. Here we have Morna, here we have Mandó in Goa, you can see all the instruments, Western instruments there. Here we have Conchão Morisco, and here we have PEDRO ARAGÁO and his colleagues playing, this is a group of choro, but we have choro in Brazil because all this Western music was introduced by force in a certain way, so all the Western music was appearing like, so this is only to show you Pedro Aragão is a wonderful musician and he plays very well.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't have that. So, and here we have also a group of Keroncong Tugu in Jakarta, which is also a musical genre that is claimed to be a Portuguese origin, just because they have the ukulele and some instruments from Western music in this. And they call them Tugus. The Tugus are the Portuguese, Portugu, so they are the Tugu. So Keroncong Tugu is music that identifies the Tugus of Jakarta. In these cases, we can say that mimetic musical genres were created in the sense of Homi Bhabha, when he refers to people dominated by sovereignties and colonial regimes, and I quote, similar to the colonizers, but different enough not to be confused with them. End of quote. As I argued elsewhere, the use of music as a tool of colonization takes advantage of its capacity for aesthetic interlocution. What I mean by this is that we can identify with certain repertoires, enjoy them, adopt them as our own without realizing how manipulative they can be, to the point of gradually transforming us into something else. The transformative power of music in creating a more equitable and less fragmented society, widely discussed by contemporary authors such as Clisala Harrison, Samuel Araújo, Ana Flávia Miguel, Rabinovich, Tim Rice, and myself, can also be seen as a subversive process of political manipulation of the other. Portugal has a well-evidenced history, also poorly studied, of using music for political manipulation. Firstly, as previously mentioned, through colonization processes, using music as an enticement based on its potential aesthetic interlocution and as a way to overcome linguistic misunderstandings. But during the period of dictatorship, music was also used to build a nation of one single voice. Movements such as the national orphanization, identified by Manuel Denis Silva, with the creation of repertoires for young people and children in schools or public and private institutions who were given a central type of repertoire, are clear examples of these processes. But radio was also crucial, in which the disc had a clear organic function. The disc, combined with radio, was one of the most effective tools for building a monodic nation and an excellent didactic instrument for creating a common repertoire between the metropolis and its colonies. It was also a subversive instrument of anti-fascist and anti-colonial struggle, and after the 1974 revolution, a mediator in education for freedom and democracy. We have here, some discs that were forbidden during before the revolution, before 1974. And here we have some slogans that were created by music, the peace, the bread, home, health, and education. This was a slogan, a refrain of a song that now is in our constitution, okay? A song of a musician that, Sérgio Godinho, who educated people for democracy after the revolution. And this slogan is in our constitution, the constitution of Portugal. It's very interesting to see this, how songs were used to educate for democracy, for freedom, and for claiming for the rights that we had. This is José Afonso, the man who created the song that was the sign of our revolution. So music was used as a way of manipulating in different ways. Okay, only as a tool for colonization, also as a way to educate for freedom, also as a way to educate after the revolution for being a democratic person and not being afraid always of the colonizers and the fascists. So in this work, I'm interested in the role of that the disc and consequently the record industry played in building a nation with a unique repertoire. That is, how the industry of the disc, in this case the 78 RPM, was used to consolidate the colonial mission and as an extension of the nation beyond the metropolis. I call it a sonorously extended nation. You can see that here we have, this is Emissora Nacional, the national radio, which was the only radio before the revolution. So we have, well, after 1969, we had more 2 or 3, but this was the most important one. And you see how he targeted the Portuguese immigrant communities in the United States, Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Goa, and Timor and Macau. So he was, the idea was to send, to produce and to broadcast for these particular places of interest for Portugal. The production of discs in Portugal during the first half of the 20th century was extremely limited due to the scarce technical conditions available in the country. In fact, there was no cutting-edge technology for recording discs, and even fewer recording studios, as stated by Eleanor Loza. Phonogram recordings were made in theaters, clubs, or in the very phonogram commercialization stores. The difficulties were overcome by using radio studios as a professional resource for recording and subsequent editing. However, since the radio was created during the Estado Novo regime, under the name of Emissora Nacional, the recordings it housed were controlled and monitored by censorship. Thus, the repertoires recorded and published were used as a form of state propaganda to be subsequently disseminated in Portugal and the colonies. Here we have the inauguration of the Emissora Nacional, and here is our Republic president at the time. So everything was controlled by the state, okay? We can find in José Moças' collection at least 36 Portuguese labels that were created between the 1920s and 1960s. We selected one record from each label that we can see in this table, which shows that fado and folklore correspond to 64% of the recorded music by those labels. Of course, we need to go deeper, but this is the first approach. This was our criteria. So let's select one, and these are the results. We decided to focus on the Estoril label and analyze 336 recordings from 168 discs. The choice of the Estoril label is justified by the fact that it is one of the publishers that disseminated the most records in the Portuguese colonies, with a significant presence in Mozambique. It was a label very oriented towards exportation that brings together in its roster of recorded artists a significant group of those who were most important as radio singers, leading movements that we call that would come to be called national cancionetismo, national songs. Out of the 336 analyzed sound recordings from Estoril label, the majority of 196, 58%, are dedicated to the Portuguese song, to the national cancionetismo, with only 38% dedicated to fado and 4% to instrumental and non-Portuguese music. The analysis hinges on the predominance of this national cancionetismo, a music-making movement coined in 1969 by a journalist critical of the dictatorial regime. This term describes a genre of songs that are often characterized as, and I quote, superficial, frivolous, and propagandistic, with frequent use of patriotic themes and praise for poverty, religious devotion, and humility. Many of these songs celebrate the subordinate role of woman in love and marriage, extol the virtues of family, depict various Portuguese landscapes, and explore the importance of religiosity and the pure feelings of the Portuguese people. I'm going to show you how it sounds. This is Artur Ribeiro, one is very well-known singers and representatives of this national song.
Que a Maria traz da fonte, mais além sujas de terra, assim como enamorada, marcham as botas cardadas do maneiro que vem do monte.
So this is the kind of repertoire, very emotional, and the lyrics are about a girl in the country who carries flowers, and he describes the country, the part of the Portugal that everybody knows how Beira is. Beira is the name of this part of the country. So it's very bucolic and lyric. A significant portion of this repertoire still forms part of a kind of incorporated archive that can be found in many of the territories of the former Portuguese colonies, as far away as Malacca, Goa, or Macau, demonstrating the importance of records and music as allies in the extension of the nation, generating resilient repertoires that, for better or worse, resist colonialism itself. In fact, behind the brand name of the Estoril label, these records were imprinted with an important mission, a watermark, as Anne Laura Stoller puts it, that inscribes, and I quote, both transparencies on which power relations were inscribed and intricate technologies of rule in themselves, in the quote. Often, the state itself promoted visits to the colonies by the singers featured in the records in a seduction maneuver that made them closer to the listeners, as if there were no distinction between the metropolis and its colonies. Here we have two examples. Simone de Oliveira here with a Portuguese icon traveling to Angola, and Natécia Barreto in Mozambique with other singers and artists when they visited. But there are many, many other examples of singers representing these discs that travel through the colonies. Well, Stoller describes colonial archives as both, I quote, both sides of the imaginary and institutions that fashioned histories as they concealed, revealed, and reproduced the power of the state. In the case of the archive constituted by the Portuguese production 78 RPM, these records, it is important to recognize its dual mission. On the one hand, to Portuguesize the country through a rhetoric of reiteration, so well achieved by the aesthetic introduction of the songs, and on the other hand, to whiten the colonies by consolidating the empire as a sonic extension of the nation based on the model of the metropolis. The documentation that Liber Sound has been systematizing still requires a lot of analytical work, but I believe we will have an excellent starting point for thinking about the commercial production of 78 RPM reports as an unavoidable process in approaching post-colonial theories, and included also in the post-colonial theories, because they are always forgetting the sound and music. Thank you. So now, it's for yes. NALINI. Let's go to the last disc. NALINI is our master's student in Portugal, and she's part of our research team also. She received a scholarship for the master's degree, but she's a very experienced filmmaker from Goa. She was born in Portugal, but all the family is from Goa, so she lives in Goa since 24 years ago. No,
Half life in Portugal, half in Goa.
half in Goa.
So I can say I'm a Goan.
So everybody knows that we will have 50 years old now.
I don't have any issue.
Okay, so
The last list. Goa is a state located in the western coast of India. It was a Portuguese colony from 1510 to 1961. And during this process of transition from Portuguese rule to a union territory of India, now a state of India, the radio of Goa, then known as Emissora de Goa, was a target of the Indian army. Is it here? Here. Yeah. The army destroyed the transmitters and suspended transmission between December 19, 1961 and January 9, 1962. And during the transformation of Goa into a union territory of India, the archives of Emissora de Goa, now All India Radio, also underwent a transformation, the disappearance of the Portuguese 78 RPM discs. This paper aims to share the experience of reconstructing the All India Radio archive through two processes: promoting listening memories and connecting private collections. These two methodological processes emerge from the field itself. In fact, when conducting interviews for my research on the performative genre theatre is a drama which also includes a song, and they all sing and acted in Konkani, which is the language in Goa. I realized that although their mother tongue was Konkani, in their memories of listening to the radio in the past, they frequently included music in Portuguese and English, not only in Konkani. This gave me the idea to explore what I call the technique of listening memories, which refers to stimulating my interlocutors to remember and recall music, and then allow them to share their thoughts independent of my interference. With this exercise, I achieved an unofficial archive, which is a complement of the material and official one. In this case, the All India Radio Archive, the institutional archive. And from now onwards, instead of saying All India Radio Archive, I will say Air Archive. It's easier. According to Harriet Bradley, an archive is, and I quote, a repository of memories, individual and collective, official and unofficial, licit and illicit, legitimating and subversive, end of quote. Bradley's approach is quite appropriate to the case of Goa and the air in particular. In fact, there's a huge difference between the music present in the memories of people when they refer to their experience of listening to the radio in the past and what is available today in the air archive. In fact, people frequently remember listening to music in language other than Konkani, like Portuguese and English, citing the radio and discs as source of the music. And presently, it is quite common to hear musicians having incorporated Portuguese repertoire in their performances. However, the Air 78 RPM discs are all in Konkani. Therefore, there is no clear correspondence between these two archives, as suggested by Bradley, the institutional archive, which is official, material, licit, and the unofficial archive, which is based on individual memories and kept on orality. So in order to solve this apparent contradiction, I decided to use personal memories as a resource for my research. When addressing my interlocutors in Goa, I came across three categories of personal memories: oral memories, written memories, and performative memories. They are identified by my interlocutors as a testimony of the disc and radio broadcasting in the past. Written memories are frequently registered in notebooks, where people used to register the lyrics of the songs they liked, and diaries, where people used to express their impressions and experiences while listening to the radio or a disc. The oral memories are the statements of my interlocutors when they speak about the music they used to listen to on the radio or their experiences with the radio itself. And finally, the performative memories are those we can testify while living in Goa, that is my case, or conducting fieldwork, because many musicians, irrespective of their age or language tradition, include in the repertoire music in Portuguese that was incorporated as a testimony of experiences of past generations with the radio and discs during the 50s and 60s. However, when searching for the discs in AIR archive, they were absent. This is an interesting contradiction that sets a precedent for further research. The memories mentioned above, which are part of the unofficial archive, are selective and depend on the social status of the language spoken at home by the families of my interlocutors. The elite, who used to speak Portuguese in the past, remembers the Portuguese songs they used to listen on the radio, while other classes who mainly spoke Konkani remember listening to music in Konkani. In this presentation, I will share 5 unique examples that demonstrate the importance of preserving memories and archives. Firstly, I will discuss 3 listening memories, as recounted by a fado singer, which is their Sonia Sirsat, and then 2 theatre performers. Theatre performance means people who acted and sing in theatre, which is Clotilde Dias and Pedro Caetano da Silva. Secondly, I will analyze a former radio announcer's diary to provide an example of a written memory, and that is of Imelda Dias. And additionally, I will present a performative memory by a present musician, Sigmund Sousa. In the final segment of my presentation, I will describe my experience of defragmenting the institutional archive. I achieved this by collaborating with a private collector who had a collection of discs that fill in the gaps of the official archive. By doing so, I was able to materialize the oral memories and provide a more comprehensive outline of the archive. Fado is a Portuguese genre of music which is performed in Goa. Since UNESCO's declaration of Fado as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2011, it gained a new life. Sonia Sirsat, 42 years old, is one of Goa's renowned Fado singers. When I questioned her about how she built her Fado repertoire, she explained that she learned Fado through her mother, Maria Alice Pinho, who used to listen to the radio through Emissora de Goa, and through the written memories of her grandmother, Henriqueta Pinho, who not only listened to the radio, but also wrote down the lyrics of the song she wanted to learn. Sonia Sirsat belongs to a social elite who used to speak Portuguese at home, and consequently sings in Portuguese, specifically Fado.
Seu amor pela arte do fado é uma herança especial das mulheres da sua família.
A gente cantava em casa. Não se expunha, não é, umas senhoras de nossa cultura, seitas, como dizemos, não se expunham fora. Portanto, era cantar entre nós. E nos tempos, quando eu era menina, não tínhamos CDs, é claro, não havia CDs, não havia televisão, mas havia rádio da emissora de Goa. Tocavam fados destes cantores como Amália, o Tristão da Silva e Tony de Matos.
Este livrinho é da minha avó, que eu não conheci. A avó materna. E ela escrevia as letras dos fados e canções portugueses que eles tocavam no rádio.
E o que é que a minha mãe fazia? Sentava ao pé da rádio a copiar, a escrever a letra. Portanto, era assim, ouvia hoje um fado, ela conseguia escrever umas linhas, ficava à espera do segundo dia de ouvir o mesmo fado. Se ouvisse, lá ia escrevendo, e assim escreveu livros.
E ficaram, pronto, na família. E agora eu tenho isto tudo. Pronto, aqui está, foi Deus. Não sei, não sabe ninguém porque canto o fado neste tom magoado de dor e de pranto, e neste tormento todo o sofrimento. Eu sinto que a alma cá dentro se acalma nos versos que canto. Foi Deus que deu luz aos olhos. And now I'm lost.
Ela vai transmitir isso para os netos. E eu ficarei muito contente que eles continuem.
So this
Seu
was the
amor pela
first,
arte do fado.
the first interview. During the first half of the 20th century, the primary source of entertainment for the Catholic community have radio at home was the theatre. And here's a theatrist, a form of musical drama accompanied by songs. I would like to share two personal listening memories by two theatrists who came from different social backgrounds from that of the fadista Sonia Sisat you just saw. The first one is Pedro Caetano da Silva. He's 87 years old and take part of theatre since his childhood. He learned Portuguese before 1961, but always spoke Konkani at home. When recollecting what he used to listen to on the radio, the majority of his memories were connected to Konkani music. And he identifies names of several Konkani composers such as C. Alves, Sousa Farão, Jacinto Vaz, etc. Nevertheless, he has memory of two Portuguese songs.
And radio आमच्या गावात पहिलोच आमगे कित्याक पाय तारवड्या ग्राउंडिंग आयकला नव्हते तर आमगे
पॉप्युलर कोंकणी कांतरीस कोण आसले 61 पयले
61 पयले ते सोजा फेराव जासीर वास सुद्दां हांवें पयले कांतार घालूंक ना न्हू जासीर वास मागीर आमचो आल्फिरेड वजयलो तो तागेले पाय किड बॉक्सर यंग मिनेजीस से आल्वारीस सोजा फेराव एंटरटेनमेंट फामाद आली famous song Costa Tua Cavicinha no ombro sor.
Like Pedro Caetano da Silva, others would listen to Emissora de Goa and be inspired by the songs played. Maria Clotilde Dias, 73 years old, who is also connected to the theatre scene, has always spoken Konkani at home. But in school before 1961, she was taught Portuguese, and it is there where she learned the only Portuguese song she knows. How did she learn this song? Maria Clotilde's teacher probably had a radio at home. She taught Maria Clotilde and her brother to not only sing, but also dance to a Portuguese song, as you can listen and see in this next video.
पहिले पावटी कोंकणी पुर्तुगीज कांतार केलेलो हांवें 9 वर्सां आसतना सॉरी 10 वर्सां आसतना कित्याक आदीं हांव पुर्तुगीज शिकतालीं हिंगा आवलांत आमच्या बेतालबातीच्या आनी आमची डिरेक्टर आहलो ती जायतीं शेतां वेजिटेबल बी रोयताली आनी त्या वर्साक गव्हर्नरान इनाम दवरलो कोणागे शेताक कोणोस बोर जाता ताका तो प्रायज दिवपाक सो एक प्रोसरी तो पाव जालो आनी स्पेशल तो थिंगसोन हिंग बेतालबाती येयल्लो तें दिवपाक ते एक भांगराचें आनी तेन्ना तें फंक्शन केल्लें आनी ते कोंकण कोण आहलोलें ताका लागून आमकां म्हाका आनी म्हगे बाबा पुर्तुगेज कांतार शिकयलें que saudades que eu tenho da infância. आनीक हे कांतार आमी दोगांयनी नाचोन म्हणपा तें नाचोन म्हणलें आनी आमगे गव्हर्नर एकदम बरें दिसलें तें भितर येयलो रोखडोच बायलांनी दोगांय आनी आमी गोट वेंगीन दवरलीं दोगांय खंय आनी आमगे डिरेक्टरी सांगिल्लें हे दोगोय भुरग्यांक घे आनी आपणागे पालासियम के दिसा यो आनी आख्खो दीस तेणें आमकां दवरली थिंगा आख्खो दीस आनी सायन्सा मागीर लेट आमकां धान दिली पूण जायतें तेणें बरें केलें आनी स्कॉलरशीप भेटयली सगळें न्हू Que saudades que eu tenho da infância. Que saudades que eu tenho do lar. Dessa quadra passada risonha sem tristeza, sem dor, sem penar. Vamos voando, cantando no ar. Gostaria ver Portugal. Maria, vamos lá embora à procura de fortuna e riqueza.
So we may say that in a certain way, this theatrice career of Clotilde started with a Portuguese song learned through the radio. An interesting written memory was that of Imelda Dias, who would later become a radio announcer. She too, like Sonia Sirsat, was part of an elite who spoke Portuguese and English at home. She chose 2 English songs the first time she sang on the radio in May 1948. And I quote, "Sometimes in 1948, Emissora de Goa launched a program titled Procurando Vocações, Looking for Talent. It sought to tap fresh talent in Goa, people who, out of modesty or shyness or lack of opportunity, did not come to the fore. My first visit to Emissora de Goa was in May 1948, at the invitation of the Director of Art and Culture, Mr. Mário Campos Lobo. He has invited me to participate in the said program. For me, it was a dream come true. I had to sing 2 songs. I chose Mamula Moon and I Love You for Sentimental Reasons for my repertoire," end of quote. And now we have the last example, which is a performative memory, is that of Sigmund Sousa. He's 55 years old, who sings regularly in cafes and restaurants. He speaks English at home. He does not know Portuguese, but in his repertoire always includes at least 1 or 2 Portuguese songs. And we are going to listen to him.
So I'm going to do a song in Portuguese. As you know, a lot of Goans still speak Portuguese. A lot of Goans still sing in Portuguese. Eu dedico esta canção para os goeses que falam português. O nome da canção é Cartas de Amor. Como jurei, na verdade o amor que senti, quantas noites em claro passei a escrever para ti.
Today, none of these records mentioned through the listening memories above are available in Air Goa, neither in Portuguese nor in English. It is the resilient memory of the Goan music lovers and performance that makes up for the absences in the Air institutional archive, an absence that may never be materialized. In fact, what is still available on Air are 447 phonograms of music in Konkani. And even this collection is not complete, which I realized when I met private collector like Cecil Pinto, 56 years old, and the theatrist Jessie Dyer, 73 years. Jessie, who's a colleague of Clotilde that you've seen before, after having seen the list of discs present in Air, immediately stated that although one of the songs was present, which is this one, 2 were absent. A statement amplified the feeling of being faced with an incomplete official archive. Retired Cecil Pinto spends his time building a collection of music. And one of these collections is his own personal archive of 78 RPM discs. He built this archive by searching for people who own discs and are willing to give them away. Currently, this archive consists of 31 discs, 15 of which are present in the collection of Air, and 16 which are not part of this institutional collection. Consequently, these absences caused the following questions to arise. Were these discs ever part of the institutional archive of Air? Were they broken or thrown out, or as we think, have happened to disappear, the disappearance of the Portuguese discs? If so, why? One of the songs present in Cecil Pinto's collection is Mobile Odo, part of a Konkani movie called Amchenoship, released in 1963. Despite the incredible success of this song and its emancipation from the film, the disc is absent from the air archive. We'll listen just a little bit, not much. So we have a repertoire of different profile, different languages, and different symbolic meaning that is absent from the official archive, although it is quite alive in the memories and in the repertoire of today's musicians in Goa. The absence of the official archive are a mystery and still need to be researched. The research described above led me to 3 different conjectures about the archive and its absences. The first one is related to the materiality of the archive, and in fact, that in spite of the possibility to complete the collection with the help of private collectors, the full collection is never complete. I will quote Derrida, says that an archive is infinite, eternally unclosed, spiraling into the uncertain future, end of quote, which I believe to define air archives as well as many others. The second one is that the material absences are not coherent because popular items like Mobile Odo, for instance, are not present in the official archive. And the third is related to the importance of individual memories that help us overcome the absences of the official archive. In this case, it is clear that the unofficial archive, which corresponds to the incorporated repertoire, what Taylor says, and I quote, the performances which takes the form of non-archival system of transfer, end of quote, seems to persist beyond the institutional one. So it is probably more powerful than the material one because it remains alive, both in the memories of the keepers and in their performances. Thank you. Obrigada.
Now, thank you, Nalini. So we're going to the last one of our presentation. CRISTIANO TSOPE is our PhD student. He receives a scholarship from River Sound also, and he's originally working at Radio Mozambique in Maputo. So he's very familiar with the archives, with the 78 RPM archives. So it has been a huge help for this for the project. So he's going to talk about early gramophone report from Mozambique, the case of Radio Mozambique Sound Archive. So he's going to present to us.
Thank you, Susana. Good afternoon to everyone. I'd like to approach this topic. The early gramophone records from Mozambique, the case of Radio Mozambique Sound Archive. This paper seeks to analyze the confrontation between racial, tribal, and dynamics facing colonial policies in the construction of Radio Mozambique Sound Archive. Created in 1932 as the Grêmio de Radiófonos da Colônia de Mozambique, the institution was a crucial instrument for Portuguese colonial policy during the period of the dictatorship, 1930 and 1974. Subsequently, the beginning of the broadcasting in the Portuguese colony of Mozambique on March 18, 1933, in the voice of the Portuguese announcer Mari Soteiro, marked the birth of its sound archive. This is one of the major sound archives amongst the former Portuguese Empire that comprises more than 100,000 vinyl discs of 33 and 45 RPM. But apart from those, there are more than 22,000 of gramophone discs, some from Portugal or in Portuguese, and most of them from the other European countries. However, in this communication, I will focus on the third shellac disc that are related to Mozambican musical practice of Black Mozambicans. As we can see there, yeah, down there, okay. The biggest part is from the European countries, and that's in almost, is that brown, is in Portuguese, and there's a line there that is little visible that comprises the Mozambican ones. And the framework of this paper are studies that focus on sound archives and colonial archives. In doing so, I resort to the concept of the archive. I quote, here I quote Miguel Garcia, as ideologically oriented knowledge. As he proposed, I quote again, in order to produce this sort of knowledge, musical expression must sometimes be mutilated, and singers, musicians, and also analysts must be made invisible. Miguel Garcia. From this concept, and valuing the fact that we are no longer studying things, but the making of them, here I got Anstola. This paper aims to contribute to the understanding of how the colonial system contributed to the low representation of native repertoire in the sound archives of Radio Mozambique. In addition, it seeks to analyze the recording process of this first Mozambican popular music and their relationship with the radio. I'd like to bring here a brief description of the archive. This archive, I have that table there with the description of the 30 shellac discs of Mozambican music. It shows that all the 30 shellac discs were recorded in South Africa, and also musicians from the southern Mozambique, Maputo, Gaza, and Inhambane provinces. And the language, the main language of those musics are in Shangaan, and we have also Chiswa from Inhambane province. And there we can also find some titles in English, Zulu, and Portuguese. And another information that I think is the most important as well are the labels. But can you play? There's a video here. Yeah, that's that image is not shown. That is one of the songs I'm talking about. Now I'm going to pass to another topic. The first one I've proposed, the recording process of early Mozambican popular music in South Africa and their relationship with the radio. The history of colonial Mozambique, especially in the southern region, is characterized by a wave of migratory movement to their neighboring colonies like South Africa, Rhodesia, and Nyasaland. And several factors contributed to this effort, including economic and political ones. in this case, as you can see the map, the resistance to exploitation of forced labor, like called chibalo in Portuguese, and also as a survival mechanism, that is the search for better working conditions and the wages, provoked migratory waves of Mozambicans, first to the Boer plantation of farms in South Africa, and later the discovery of the diamonds mines in Kimberley in 1867, and the gold mines in Transvaal, also in South Africa, in 1886, brought the increase of migrants in South Africa. And during the Second World War, the number of Mozambicans who worked in neighboring territories increased considerably. And according to official statistics, we have some numbers there. It rose, the number of Mozambicans in South Africa rose from 105,000 to 286 at the beginning of 1940 to 137,676 migrants at the end of 1944. And along with this point, there was also the need for cultural expression by migrants, something that was quite limited in their region of origin. So in this context, in South Africa and in the compounds, it was during their hours of rest and leisure that miners dedicated themselves to performing the musical rhythm of their lands of origin. Such exhibitions were called intertribal dances, and in the crown mine, one of the places they used to perform, as spectacles also intended to attract tourists. And every Sunday, one of the camps organized a dance by invitation, and it was the responsibility of the mining companies to organize those events. And they also were in charge of providing the customs and necessary props for the event. I got Antonio Sopa, and it was in this contest that different ethnic groups created their composition, and all the talents that showed up in the mines were taken to the South Africa recording studios. We have the example of one Mozambican musician, Fanny Foom, one of the icons of the first generation of Mozambican musicians that created one of the genres called Marabenta from Mozambique. Sorry, no, there's no. And that map I've shown, we can see that the neighboring countries where they used to migrate to. And the second reason is that among the British colonies in South Africa, in Southern Africa, South Africa was the most developed and one of the most industrialized. And therefore, the phonographic industry was more advanced as well, while in Mozambique at that time, it did not even exist, as it would only be established between the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the following date. And the last explanation for them recording in South Africa, the last explanation to mention at this point is that the fact that although the entire Southern Africa region was under European domination with laws based on racial differences, and the system of Portuguese and British colonial governance were quite different. What happens? In Mozambique, the laws of assimilation, Susana has talked a bit about that, called indigenato, have limited the local cultural practices of the Mozambicans. And this I will talk a bit about it later. And in South Africa was instituted the regime of separated development and later apartheid. So based on ethnic and racial differences, these allowed different ethnic groups to practice their culture. For that, there were also labels provided to Black musicians in South Africa. In this case, we have one example, Daniel Marivat, who was born in South Africa in the end of the 19th century. We don't have the specific date. The first successful Shangani singer in South Africa. So Marivat has opened the way for Mozambicans, migrants, to record their songs in South Africa. And there we have Feliciano Gomes and Francisco Maikwan, known as the first one recording their songs in 1945, representing Mozambique in the minds of South Africa. So, and the historian Antônio Sopa gives us examples of how long those musicians have stayed in South Africa. We have here, for example, Chidimingwana, who stayed for 18 months in South Africa, Dylan Ginge for 2 years, and Lisboma Chavel, 2 years as well, Alexandre Langa, 10 years, Francisco Maikwana, 20 years, and Fanny Fumo, about 25 years. And now I'm going to approach the second point of my presentation. The colonial system and the low representation of native repertoire in the sound archive. I want to answer the first question I've presented. In this session, I will focus on some aspects that have led to low representation of native repertoire in the sound archive of the Radio Mozambique. Apart from the technical aspects I have mentioned earlier, in some cases, the acceptance of certain musical practices in the context of historical European colonization was in general conditioned to validation criteria that resulted in, I quote John Blacking, the ethnocentric division between music and ethnic music, or between artistic music and folk music, distinctions that different cultures and social groups make between music and non-music. So in this sense, African musical practice in general and Mozambican ones in particular were generally classified as folklore or drums. As John Blacking concludes, such tests of local ability could clearly be relevant only to cultures whose musical systems are similar to those of the tester or the evaluator. Therefore, Eurocentrism led to the marginalization of African or Mozambican music and culture. The Mozambican musician João Domingos, interviewed by the ethnomusicologist Eduardo Lixus in May 2005 in Maputo, he testifies that, I quote, in Lawrence Marx, there were no conditions for African culture to be manifested in a free and expressive way, which is why Western repertoires were a way of breaking the sham. End of quotation. And another aspect is that musical accompaniment or proximity to European and Western music, genres, and rhythm did matter in that context. This is to say, the artists and songs for recording, as well as the performance of non-white musicians in Lawrence Marcus, the type of instrumental accompaniment, whether European or Western, or traditional African, in this case, associated with the repertoire were fundamental elements for the approval of the performance. In this case, the first musicians who recorded for commercialization played, or the instrument you used to play was of European origin. As Antônio Sopa asks, in the mining centers of Witwatersrand, musical instruments such as tambourines, guitars, concertinas, pianos, and canes full of stones circulated throughout the communities. The author adds that João Mulimbi from Zanzibar, a violin player, was the first reference to a Black musician in Lourenço Marques in the 1920s. In some cases, some Black musicians tried to play the colonial, tried to please the colonial government, intending to compose songs that they would enjoy. And in this led to a disagreement between musicians like Lisboa Matavel and Francisco Maekwan. The first one was accused of trying to attract the attention of the colonial authorities in his compositions and performance, bringing them closer to European styles and rhythms, discontinuing the traditions of African music. And in this case, there's an article published in the newspaper called Voz Africana, or African Voice, in Beira in October 1965, with the title, Lisboa Matavel and he said, at Feira de Luanda do not represent our folklore. And he clarifies that, I quote, we saw Lisboa Matavel and his group a few times, the last of which was in the auditorium of the Red Club of Mozambique. In one of the presentation of the well-known program Africanoid or Africa at Night, Lisboa Matavel enters with what appears to be a national flag or Portuguese flag. His group performs Marabenta, the one we have listened to the rhythm of military march that is from Portugal. And he says, I'm Portuguese, my land, Mozambique, Portugal. So as Luis Lefort, the retired professional of the Radio Mozambique states, and I quote also, no one will produce records if the expected income is low. It's all a matter of commercial laws. You earn more, the more records you produce. And perhaps the most important is that the recording market and the radio broadcasting in African language was not aimed at Mozambique, but at South Africa. And as a result, only a small part of these products, this was brought to Mozambique in that context. So, and this is one of the reasons why we have a few shellac discs of Mozambican musicians. And the other aspect is that the censorship of songs content has also contributed to low representation of local musicians, even though in general, Mozambican songs recorded in South Africa spoke of women, family, and other aspects of their daily lives. There were musicians like Eusébio João Tamel, Fanny Fumo, and others who introduced some political content in their songs. Those songs were discovered later and would be removed from the archive or from the radio. And in the late 1940s and 1950s, the number of recordings in several Mozambican languages increased considerably, criticizing, for example, aspects of the migrant life, forced labor, low wages, and the risk of being deported to São Tomé, according to David Edge. And for example, Maekwan, in one of his songs, he refers to the arrogance of the administrator of Masia, called Makandan, who, like many other colonial administrators, used to pick up migrants who had just arrived from the mines to forced work, ignoring their right to a 6 month of rest. So having realized the danger of this form of communication, the recordings, in 1953, the colonial regime launched a campaign to censor discs and in that context, he identified 13 as unapproved. It should be noted that the South African police collaborated in replacing several of these recordings, and the customs office at the border gate of Resanca seized it and destroyed the main recording from Mozambique. So my final considerations. Well, this communication has revealed that there are many aspects that may have contributed to the low representation of native repertoire in the sound archive of Radio Mozambique. However, at the moment, I can just mention 3 points. The first one is that the colonial system and its ethnocentric and racialized policies prevented most Mozambicans from recording their songs by treating them as non-music. And the second one is that not all the shellac discs of the Black Mozambican musicians recorded in South Africa were sent to Mozambique because of many reasons. And the last one is that the few phonographic discs of the Mozambican musicians that were sent to Mozambique during the historic colonialism faced the censorship due to their content. And those are the bibliographical references I have used. And thank you.